Good morning and welcome to the board's first meeting of 2020, the first meeting of the decade. Beautiful day here in Albany. The weather means a lot to me. I always try to comment on it. It is a beautiful day. I'm glad to be here. I'm thinking about the people of Puerto Rico, South Shore of Puerto Rico, on the second shore. There's been a great deal of devastation. I'm mindful of it, and we wish those people well. You will note that behind tab 15 there is a new schedule, revised schedule for the meetings this year. The November meeting has been moved. If that presents an issue for anyone, I don't think it will. I think we asked that question at the last meeting, and please say so as soon as you can. And just to note, our next regular meeting will be on the 5th of February. It will be in New York City. You've had a chance to review the minutes of the December 11 meeting, our first agenda item. Anyone have any comments?
I think I found a typo.
Okay.
On page 7. It talked about deferring payment of principal for 2,048 years. I think it should be 2/2048. It's on the bottom of the page.
Page 7?
Page 7, yes.
Oh.
None of us would care, I guess.
Either way, we don't
I missed that.
We will make that change.
Okay,
Thank
I
you.
didn't see these.
Are there any other comments? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve that? Joan, thank you. Second? John? Gordon, thank you very much. All in favor, please say with aye. Aye. That is approved unanimously. We go to the Finance Committee report. Chairman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had yesterday in Albany. We adopted the meeting minutes from the December 10th meeting of the Finance Committee. We then advanced to discuss a number of offerings that's on today's agenda. They're on today's agenda. Montefiore, Interagency Development Building Agencies, the Columbia University, NISAC, and St. Joseph's College. And after some various discussions and back and forth, we recommend that they all be approved at today's meeting. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Questions for Jerry? Hearing none, we move then to the third item on the agenda, the adoption of the monthly documents. Mr. President.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Behind tab 3 is the Master BOCES Program Lease Revenue Bond Transaction Summary. We have Seth Bryant and Sonny Williams or Bryant Rubino here, and Steve will do the presentation to us.
Morning, Steve. Seth, Sonny, good to have you here.
Thank you. Good morning. I just have a brief update on the approvals before turning it over to Seth and Sonny. The board will recall this is a financing in an amount not to exceed $12,850,000 on behalf of Onondaga, Cortland, Madison BOCES for the purchase of its Crown Road campus in Liverpool, which the BOCES is currently leasing. The resolution proceed was adopted at the December 11th DASNY board meeting. KCB approved the transaction at its December 18th meeting, and seeker was filed on January 6th. SED also requires certain reviews in connection with the acquisition of the building, which have been completed. If there's any questions, you can take them. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Sonny to present the documents.
Questions for Steve? Seth, Sonny?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Seth Bryant. I'm managing partner of Bryant Rubino LLP. I'm joined by my new partner, Sonny Williams, who just joined our firm on Monday. So he is here, one, for an introduction to you. Many of you probably do know him. He won't be remarking or presenting on the transaction. He's here for moral support. So.
You got it.
Congratulations.
Morning, everyone. Thank you.
So today, the members of the authority are being asked to consider and in the board's discretion adopt a series resolution for up to $12,850,000 of Master BOCES program lease revenue bonds for Onondaga, Cortland, and Madison County BOCES. The bonds will be Series 2020, which, if adopted, would be issued on behalf of the Board of Cooperative Educational Services of the Sole Supervisory District of Onondaga, Cortland, and Madison counties under DASNY's Master BOCES program lease revenue bond resolution adopted on August 15, 2001, as supplemented on February 25, 2004, and March 11, 2015. If approved, the Series 2020 resolution authorizes the bonds to finance the acquisition of the land and improvements currently leased by the BOCES located at 4500 Crown Road, Liverpool, New York. The Series 2020 bonds are to be issued to provide monies to fund the cost of the acquisition of the facility, to fund the debt service reserve fund, and or pay the cost of acquiring a reserve fund facility with respect to the bonds, and pay the cost of a policy of municipal bond insurance, if any, with respect to such bonds, and to pay all or a portion of the cost of issuance of such bond offering. The Series 2020 bonds are proposed to be sold in a negotiated sale to Roosevelt and Cross pursuant to a bond purchase agreement that contains terms and conditions which are customary in connection with the sale of DASNY bonds. Under Section 1689 of the DASNY Act, DASNY is permitted to issue bonds to finance or refinance the cost of constructing BOCES school facilities. Under the Act, DASNY is authorized to become lessee of such facilities and to lease back such facilities to the BOCES. The Act provides that DASNY shall file a certificate annually with the Commissioner of Education stating all amounts due from BOCES to DASNY under the lease and agreement, which I'll describe hereafter. Upon receipt of a certification from the Commissioner of Education, the State Comptroller is required to deduct the amount certified by the Commissioner as due to DASNY from the state aid otherwise payable to the BOCES and pay that amount directly to DASNY or the trustee. If the state aid is insufficient, the BOCES will remain obligated to pay the rent. The Series 2020 bonds will be special obligations of DASNY, payable solely out of the revenues and the monies and investments held in the funds and accounts established by the Series 2020 resolution, other than any monies and investments held in a fund established under the general resolution for the purpose of making arbitrage rebate payments, if any, to the United States Department of the Treasury. With respect to the Series 2020 bonds, revenues consist generally of the basic rent to be paid by the BOCES under the lease and agreement on account of debt service on the Series 2020 bonds out of state aid payable to the BOCES, and payments to be made by the State Comptroller to DASNY out of state aid otherwise payable to the BOCES. Payment of the Series 2020 bonds is secured by the pledge and assignment made by the general resolution of the revenues, certain monies and investments, including the debt service reserve fund held under the general resolution, and DASNY's right thereto. Such pledge and assignment shall be subordinate to the pledge and assignment made by the BOCES in order to secure the authority's Master BOCES Program Lease Refunding Revenue Bonds, Series 2015, if any shall remain outstanding. I'll describe the general resolution. In more detail. The general resolution constitutes the basic agreement between DASNY and the holders of the bonds issued under the general resolution. The general resolution provides for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds in an unlimited principal amount. Each series of bonds issued under the general resolution is to be secured separately from the other series so that the general resolution may be utilized to provide financing or refinancing for any BOCES in the state of New York. The general resolution sets forth the general terms for any series of bonds, conditions for issuance of any series of bonds, security for the bonds, funds and accounts and flow of monies through such funds and accounts, events of default, and remedies, provisions regarding the amendments to the general resolution, provisions regarding the fiduciaries, covenants of DASNY, and defeasance provisions. The general resolution in each series resolution establish all of the funds and accounts for the bonds. Among the other funds created by the general resolution is a debt service reserve fund. The debt service reserve fund must, as a condition to the issuance of each series of bonds, be at its requirement upon such issuance. The general resolution provides that the requirement is equal to the lesser of 1/2 of the amount equal to the greatest amount required during the year in which it is calculated, or any future year to pay the sum of the principal and sinking fund installments of and interest on such series of outstanding bonds. And 2, the maximum amount permitted to be deposited therein from the proceeds of the bonds under the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. The general resolution permits the use of letters of credit, surety bonds, or insurance policies to meet all or a portion of the debt service reserve fund requirement. It is not anticipated requirement. The Series 2020 resolution authorizes the issuance of Series 2020 bonds in an amount that do not exceed the limits set forth above. The Series 2020 resolution delegates to various officers of DASNY the power, among others, to determine the date or dates on which any Series 2020 bonds will mature, the principal amount of Series 2020 bonds which are to be issued, provided that the principal amount will not exceed $12,850,000, the date or dates on which principal and interest on the Series 2020 bonds are to be paid, provided that principal of a series of bonds may be payable on any February 15th or in August 15th through the final maturity date thereof. The rate or rates at which the Series 2020 bonds will bear interest, provided that the true interest cost on the Series 2020 bonds may not exceed 7.5% per annum. The purchase prices for the Series 2020 bonds to be paid upon the initial sale to the underwriters, provided that the Series 2020 bonds are not sold at a price that is less than 90% of the principal amount of Series 2020 bonds sold. The redemption dates and prices, provided that the redemption price does not exceed 103% of the principal amount of the Series 2020 bonds to be redeemed, plus accrued interest to the redemption date. Whether the Series 2020 bonds will be book entry bonds and the depository therefore, whether the Series 2020 bonds will be insured, the power to procure a policy of municipal bond insurance for the payment of principal and sinking fund installments of and interest on the bonds, and whether a letter of credit, surety bond, insurance policy, etc. will be used to meet all or a portion of the debt service reserve fund. The Series 2020 resolution also authorizes various officers of DASNY to prepare and distribute a preliminary official statement, a final official statement, to execute a bond purchase agreement, to execute the agreement of lease and lease and agreement, to execute all other documents and do all the other things necessary or advisable in connection with the sale and issuance of the Series 2020 bonds, and to execute a memorandum of understanding, which I'll describe. I'll describe the agreement of lease and lease and agreement. Under the agreement of lease, the authority will lease the facility from the BOCES for a nominal amount for a term that will end when the Series 2020 bonds have matured or when no Series 2020 bonds are outstanding. Under the leasing agreement, OCM BOCES will lease the facility from the authority for a term that will end when the Series 2020 bonds have matured or when no Series 2020 bonds are outstanding. Under the leasing agreement, the basic rent will be an amount equal to the scheduled payments of principal and interest or sinking fund payments due on the Series 2020 bonds. Additional rent amounts due under the leasing agreement shall include fees due to the authority, administrative expenses of the authority, the trustee and the paying agent, and amounts due related to arbitrage rebate fund requirements. Under the leasing agreement, OCM BOCES pledges a sufficient portion of its public funds to cover amounts due under the leasing agreement. I'll describe the memorandum of understanding. The authority, the New York State Department of Education, and the Office of the State Comptroller will enter into a memorandum of understanding pursuant to which the authority will certify to the Commissioner of the Department of Education the amounts due under the lease and agreement. The Department of Education will certify such amounts to the Office of the State Comptroller. The Office of the State Comptroller shall deduct such certified amounts from amounts otherwise payable as state aid to the BOCES and pay such amounts to the trustee of the Series 2020 bonds. The trustees shall use such amounts to make payments of principal and interest related to the Series 2020 bonds and payments due under the lease and agreement. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do the members have questions for Seth or for Steve? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Darrell, thank you. Jerry, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentlemen,
Chairman.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Connie, Seth, thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
Behind tab 4 is the Trevor Day School transaction summary. We have co-bond counsel Lawrence Bauer from Norton Rose Fulbright and Douglas Seaton from Seaton Associates. And Steve was at the table for this transaction.
Thank you. This is the adoption of documents for Trevor Day School in an amount not to exceed $66 million to refund and restructure the school's DASNY Series 2011 bonds and to terminate 2 interest rate swap agreements integrated with these bonds. The DASNY resolution to proceed was approved at the November 13th board meeting, and PACB was approved on November 20th. When we presented in November, the school was in the process of selecting a qualified institutional buyer to purchase the proposed bonds through a private placement. The school has since selected First Republic Bank. The bonds will have a maturity of up to 30 years from their date of issuance. As we presented in November and agreed to by the purchaser, for the first 3 years from closing, there will be interest-only payments. And beginning in year 4, principal will amortize over the remaining 27 years. The bonds will have a 20-year fixed rate of 2.65%, which will reset in 20 years at the 10-year treasury rate plus 135 basis points. Security required by the purchaser is expected to include a mortgage and an all-asset. The purchaser is also expected to require financial covenants. Secret filing was made on December 11th, and the TEFRA hearing was held on December 20th, with governor's approval of the TEFRA being received on December 31st. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can turn it over to Larry and Douglas to present the documents.
Thanks, Steve. Questions for Steve?
Hi, Douglas Seaton. In case anything is repeated, we just want to reinforce the information so you'll have it. Thank you, Doug.
You got it.
So the series resolution before you for consideration is the adoption of a series resolution authorizing the issuance of bonds under the DASNY's Trevor Day School Revenue Bond General Resolution previously adopted on April 27, 2011. The series resolution authorizes issuance of up to $66 million of Series 2020 bonds expected to be used to, 1, refinance all of the authority's currently outstanding Trevor Day School Revenue Bond Series 2011, 2, pay the market-based termination amounts in the school's interest rate swaps related to the 2011 bonds, and 3, pay the cost of issuance. The Series 2020 bonds will be sold to First Republic Bank in a privately placed sale and purchase. The Series 2020 bonds will have a 30-year maturity, first 3 years interest only, followed by a 27-year mortgage-style amortization, and will bear interest at a rate that will be fixed for the first 20 years, after which the reset base will be based on a 10-year U.S. Treasury yield plus a spread. The Series 2020 bonds will be subject to optional redemption at a declining premium during the first 5 years and thereafter at par. The series resolution delegates to various officers of DASNY the power to make the determinations described in our letter and to do all things necessary or convenient in connection with the sale and the issuance of the Series 2020 bonds. The general resolution. As stated before, it was adopted April 27, 2011. The general resolution constitutes the agreement between DASNY and the holders of the bonds issued under it and contains the basic terms of the agreement. After the closing, the Series 2020 bonds will be the only bonds outstanding under the general resolution. The bonds issued under the general resolution, including the Series 2020 bonds, will be special obligations of DASNY, payable solely out of and secured by revenues which consist of certain payments to be made by the school under the loan agreement with the authority relating to the Series 2020 bonds. I'll turn it over to Larry.
Thank you, Douglas, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Larry Bauer from Norton Rose Fulbright. As Douglas mentioned, this is the second financing or refinancing for the Trevor Day School, so the authority has gone through this once before. The loan agreement is your standard DASNY borrower loan agreement, which obligates the institution to make payments sufficient to, in time and amount, to pay the principal and interest on the bonds, and any redemption premium, as we heard from Steve and Douglas earlier, if they call it in the first 5 years. The authority's rights under the loan agreement will be assigned to the bond trustee, which is Bank of New York Mellon. In this transaction, it's the bond trustee under the general resolution for Trevor Day. Because the bonds are being sold in a direct placement to First Republic and the school are entering into a continuing covenants agreement. You've seen those in other transactions, I'm sure, which lay out the financial and other covenants that the school is obligating itself to for the life of the loan, including debt service coverage requirement of 115, a liquidity requirement of $12 million, and certain other financial covenants as well. And First Republic has veto power over the incurrence of additional debt by the school. The authority is not a party to the continuing covenants agreement, but if the school defaults under the continuing covenants agreement and First Republic calls the default, then that cross defaults to the loan agreement. So it would be a default under the loan agreement and then entitling the authority for certain remedies to the extent that those haven't been assigned over to the trustee, as I indicated earlier. The additional security that is being provided by the school, the security that's being provided by the school consists of a revenue pledge of its unrestricted revenues. Sometimes these schools get pledges and stuff from donors that are restricted for a particular purpose. So unrestricted revenues are pledged. There's also a mortgage on the building on East 95th Street in Manhattan that housed the original project that was financed by the authority. 2011 is now being refinanced. Both of those, the security agreement and pledge revenues and other assets and the mortgage are going to be held by the trustee for the bonds. They're being assigned over. That's really the whole security package that exists for the financing. And as I said, the loan agreement is just a standard loan agreement that the authority has entered into. And Al, I echoed your comments about Puerto Rico, by the way. I've worked with the government on their financing since 1981. I have a lot of friends down there, and it's a tough, very scary time.
Keep our fingers crossed. Are there questions for Steve, Doug, or Lawrence? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Let me just remind everyone, I sat on the board during much of Trevor Day School, during much of the deliberation over the initial financing, immediately preceding 2011. My kids both attended Trevor Day School.
And you're a proud parent.
And I am always a proud parent. I could go through all my kids' various educational institutions. My mother, my father, all New York State educated, so not bad. I don't believe that presents a problem, but I thought I would remind them.
Or do I? And thank you for the disclosure.
Carol, thank you. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent? Thank you very much. Is there a second? John Johnson, thank you very much. And I didn't say Joan, forgive me.
That's
Thank
okay. You looked at me.
you. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Before you all leave the table, may I call you Lawrence?
Larry.
Larry? It's a pleasure to have you here at the table representing firm that hasn't been here for a long time. In fact, your firm, North Rose, is a successor firm to Fulbright Jaworski,
Yes.
which has been at this table, but not in recent years. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
I'd like to be here more often.
If it pleases the authority, you can.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Doug.
And please give Ralph Dawson my
Yes,
best
I will.
regards.
I certainly will.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Behind tab 5, we have the Jewish Theological Seminary of America transaction summary. Our update with co-bond counsel Doran Bar-Rav and of Harris Beach, and Michelle Hutchinson of Brown Hutchinson LLP, and Gerard Clowes, who will be the staff.
Good morning and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Welcome. Ron, Michelle.
Good morning, everyone.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, DASNY senior staff and guests, the transaction summary update and staff report provided to the members is for the adoption of documents for the Jewish Theological Seminary. This transaction will include the tax exempt and or taxable, fixed and or variable rate bonds in one or more series at one or more times through a private placement. The purpose of the transaction is the reimbursement of prior capital expenditures related to the construction of a building used for student housing and a library. Some updates. Since the approval of the resolution to proceed on December 11, 2019, a purchaser in addition to TD Bank has been added. That purchaser is People's United Muni Finance Corporation. They are a QUIB, which is a qualified institutional bank, which is a requirement when privately placing bonds. It is expected that there will be a Series 2020A and a Series 2020B bond issued. Approvals, our resolution to proceed was received on December 11. The PACB approval was received on December 18. Our TEFRA hearing was received December 18. The seeker was completed on December 30. The bonds are not rated as this is a private placement. The security features include a pledge of receipts acceptable to the purchasers and the mortgage on the borrower's real property at 3080 Broadway, representing the borrower's campus in the Morningside Heights as provided in the term sheet. I highlighted this specific property in this instance because in previous meetings there was just an inquiry as to where the mortgage was identified. So the term sheet is where that's located. Staff requests the board adopt documents for the Jewish Theological Seminary for a term not to exceed 31 years, an amount not to exceed $41 million. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Questions for Gerard? There being none, please. Ron, Michelle.
Okay, good morning. I'll try to be brief since Gerard has covered this and you don't need to hear it twice, but I'll put a little legal spin on it. So before you, for your consideration, is the adoption of two series resolutions. One, a Series 2020A series resolution in a principal amount of $41 million, and a second series resolution also in a principal amount of $41 million. Both of them would be necessary for the two series of bonds to be issued, and both would be issued pursuant to the general resolution that was adopted by the authority on June 21st, 2017, in order to have the first bond issue issued at the time. Because there are two purchasers, there's two bond series, two series resolutions, and this would then be the second and third series of bonds to be issued under the general resolution. Little history and maybe a little background on why we're doing what we're doing now. On June 28th, 2017, the authority issued $51 million worth of revenue bonds. That was the Series 2017 bonds to finance a portion of the cost of construction of the new library and student dormitory. At the time, the Jewish Theological Seminary anticipated paying for the balance of the construction, which was then in excess of about $85 million, out of other resources, and so they only borrowed $51 million. Now that they are completing the construction, in fact, it may actually be done now, They've decided that they would rather refinance on a tax-exempt basis the portion they didn't refinance or didn't finance the first time. And so that's why we're here today, is for the approval of the balance of that project to be financed. As Gerard mentioned, this will be a private placement with two quibs to purchasers, TD Bank or an affiliate, and People's United Muni Finance or an affiliate. What is anticipated is that the bond series will both be of initial, they'll both have a nominal maturity of 30 years, but they will initially be two fixed rate bonds for a period of 15 years, which will then be subject to a put back, and that would then require the bonds to be renegotiated by the borrower to the satisfaction of the purchasers, who would then presumably retain the bonds for the additional 15 years on somewhat different terms, or at least a different interest rate. But the idea is it's fixed for 15 years, and then they'll renegotiate. So the other salient points that are worth mentioning are that no debt service reserve fund is being established for either of the two series. No official statement or private placement memorandum is being prepared either by the authority or by the institution, because there's no need to direct purchases with financial institutions. Under some recent guidance that we got from legal staff, there also won't be a bond purchase agreement with the authority being involved. The purchase of the bonds will be done directly pursuant to bond purchase and continuing covenants agreements. There's simply between the bond purchasers and the institution itself. The series resolutions delegate to an authorized officer the power to make a number of enumerated decisions, the most important of which are the amount to be issued, as long as the aggregate amount of the two series does not exceed 41 million. The maturity can't exceed 31 years from July 1 upcoming. The rates are limited to a true interest cost or an initial interest cost on a tax-exempt basis of 7.5% and on a taxable basis of 10%. They can be issued as variable rate or at fixed rate, but as I mentioned, it's expected they will be an initial 15-year fixed rate period. And there are a number of other delegated powers, all of which cannot be inconsistent with the terms of the general resolution and the series resolution. And with that summary, I'll turn it over to Michelle to talk about the loan agreement.
Good morning again. Just as an aside, I had the honor of working on the 2017 issue, which was one of the first ones that I worked on with DASNY, so it's pretty nice to be able to follow up with this one, so thank you for the opportunity. I'll just discuss the loan agreement. The authority and the institution will execute a loan agreement in connection with the issuance of the 2020 bonds. The loan agreement, will require the institution to make timely payments of principal, sinking fund installments, if any, and interest on the 2020 bonds. Amounts required to be paid for fees, costs, and expenses of the authority and the trustee are to be paid directly to the authority. The obligation of the institution to make payments under the loan agreement is a general obligation of the institution, payable out of any legally available monies, and such obligation is neither subject to being decreased, abated, or postponed for any reason, nor any defense, set off, recoupment, or counterclaim by the institution against the authority, the trustee, or any bondholder. The institution's obligations under the loan agreement are expected to be secured by security interest in its gross receipts, subject to any prior pledges, one or more mortgages on the property, constituting the premises on which the project is located, all of which is to be assigned or granted, as the case may be, to the trustee. It is anticipated that an intercreditor agreement will be executed that will cause the Series 2020 bonds to be on parity with, excuse me, the 2017 bonds with respect to the pledged revenues and mortgages. Another matter, other matters consistent with the authority's financing guidelines, specific security for the institution's obligations under the loan agreement will be determined by the purchaser and the institution. In addition, the loan agreement may also contain certain financial covenants required by the purchaser. The private sale of the Series 2020A bonds and the Series 2020B bonds to the respective purchasers will be effectuated through the execution of a bond purchase and a continuing covenants agreement or similar agreement between such purchaser and the institution, a default under which will constitute a default under the loan agreement. Excuse me. All right. Any questions?
Questions? Hearing none, may we have a motion, please, to approve the transaction?
Joan, thank you very much. Merrill, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye. Is there none opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yes, we now have our single approval financing behind tab 6, Montefiore Obligated Group. Summary will be by Neil Kaplan and Michelle Hutchinson and Gerard Flowers will also be part of the transaction.
If I might, Mr. President, just if this is a procedural matter, we're presenting the Montefiore transaction to the board as a single approval. We've been working with the Department of Health on this transaction. They are supportive of it, and you will hear from Tracy later on that. We would have liked to have brought this transaction to the board in December as a resolution to proceed. However, it was not ready at that time. Montefiore's schedule calls for them to be in the market in January. As such, we're bringing this transaction to you now at this meeting for single approval. We're requesting that you consider this transaction as an exception to our single approval guidelines because Montefiore is rated in the triple category. As you'll recall, our single approval guidelines offer single approval treatment, institutions, higher education, and healthcare that are rated in the A category or better. We did a Montefiore deal, just last year in 2018, so you saw them, pretty recently. As you know, we've been working very hard to bring clients, especially healthcare institutions, back to DASNY. While we're mindful of our guidelines, we also wanted to ensure that the Department of Health had sufficient time to review this transaction. It should be noted that there is no DOH approval memo in this package because we are considering this financing pursuant to the DASNY statute and not the MICTA statute. But again, you'll hear from Tracy after the presentations. So really, in an effort to balance the needs of all the parties, we're seeking approval of this transaction on a single approval basis as an exception. So I just wanted to mention that up front. If you have any questions on that, happy to talk about that. And otherwise, I would turn it over to Gerard to present the financing.
Questions, portion? Thank you. Gerard?
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It is not my intent in any way to steal any thunder from bond counsel, but, and I apologize for this, but since this is a single approval, there may be some duplication in my comments to you. So I apologize, Neil, for anything. The staff report provided the members seeking authorization for the Montefiore Obligated Group Series 2020 bonds. In order to provide some clarity, I would like to note that Montefiore Medical Center is the sole member of the Montefiore Obligated Group. This will be a publicly offered or privately placed bond issue in an amount not to exceed $420 million and a term not to exceed 30 years. The bonds may be issued in one or more series as tax exempt and or taxable in a fixed and or variable rate mode. The hospital's primary service area is the Bronx and southern Westchester County, where the hospital holds a 35% market share. The hospital's occupancy rate has been consistently high and was 89.17% in 2018, above regional and DASNY medians. The purpose of our financing that you are considering today will include the construction of the White Plains Hospital and various capital projects at Montefiore Medical Center, including cardiology, imaging, pharmacy, and information technology equipment. The transaction also includes the refunding of the Build New York City Resource Corporation Revenue Bonds, Series 2013A and 2013B Montefiore Medical Center project in the amount of $57.6 million. It is estimated that the refunding will produce $3.3 million of net present value savings. The financing is expected to produce level debt service. Security provisions and obligation issued on the Master Trust indenture will be secured by a pledge of the medical center's gross receipts, a debt service reserve fund if required by investors, a mortgage on the medical center facilities if required by investors. Some highlights include the medical center has been profitable over the last 5 years with an average operating gain of $31.5 million, with the highest gain of $56.5 million in 2017. Other items worth noting include 149 days cash on hand, a current ratio of 2.59, and a debt service coverage ratio of 3.84, all of which are above the regional medians and above or in line with DASNY medians. It is expected that the medical center will concurrently issue taxable debt away from DASNY. The medical center would like to take advantage of the currently favorable rates and the flexibility to address upcoming projects on the near horizon. Currently, the medical center is rated BBB flat. The medical center expects to maintain a rating in the BBB category. Approvals, our PACB approval is anticipated on January 15th, 2020. The TEFRA has been posted and pending approval, anticipated January 17th, 2020. And the seeker approval is today, January 8th, 2020. Staff recommends that the board adopt documents for one or more series of 30-year taxable and or tax-exempt fixed and or variable rate bonds in amount not to exceed $420 million. Mr. Chairman, I defer to Kevin.
Thank you, Roy. Michelle, why don't you start?
I will, thank you. So before you for consideration is the adoption of two series resolutions under the general resolution that was adopted by the authority by the board June 20th of 2018. As Gerard said, each resolution authorizes $420 million, and in the aggregate, $420 million, not to exceed the $420 million. It's expected that the bonds will consist of a single series tax exempt bonds, but a second resolution is proposed as well to, in the event that it is determined that the issuance of the Series 2020 bonds in more than one series is desirable. Again, the bonds are to be issued in fixed rate mode, but will be subject to mandatory tender at any time that such bonds are subject to optional redemption. The bonds purchased pursuant to a mandatory tender may be converted to another fixed rate mode or a variable interest rate mode. I hope I'm not being duplicative of Gerard. My apologies if I am. The proceeds of the bonds will be loaned to Montefiore Medical Center pursuant to the loan agreement to pay for or reimburse for the cost of capital projects for the benefit of the medical center. A portion of the proceeds of the bonds is also being issued to refund bonds issued by Build NYC Resource Corporation that financed improvements to the medical center's Hutchinson Tower facility. No relation.
Thank you, Michelle. As Michelle mentioned, the proceeds of the bonds will be loaned to Montefiore Medical Center pursuant to a loan agreement between the medical center and the authority, and pursuant to the loan agreement, the payments to be made under the loan agreement will be sufficient to pay the principal, interest, redemption price, and purchase price of the bonds as applicable to all. Also, the bonds will be secured, or the payment of debt service or agreement obligations of Montefiore Medical Center will be secured by an obligation which will be executed by the members of the obligated group, which, as Gerard mentioned, at this point is solely Montefiore Medical Center, and pursuant to a master trust indenture between the medical center, the master trustee, and solely in its capacity as the obligated group representative, Montefiore Health System, Inc. Montefiore Health System, Inc. is the sole member of Montefiore Medical Center, as well as the other affiliates of within the family of Montefiore. Although the resolution authorizes the issuance of fixed-rate bonds and variable rate bonds, it's anticipated that the bonds proposed to be authorized today will be issued as variable rate bonds that will initially be offered in a fixed-rate mode. The reason why we refer to these bonds as variable rate bonds is, as Michelle had mentioned, that on any of the dates that the bonds are subject to optional redemption, the authority will also have the option at the direction of Montefiore, the ability to require the bond owners to tender their bonds, at which point those bonds could be remarketed and bear interest at either a fixed rate to maturity or an additional mode, which has the effect of allowing the authority to, in effect, current refund these bonds without issuing new bonds to do so. The bonds will be offered by a syndicate of underwriters, the lead manager of which is Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And at the same time, as Gerard had mentioned, as the bonds are issued, Montefiore Medical Center plans to issue its own corporate debt, which will also be secured by an obligation issued under the master indenture, which will be on a parity with the bonds, as well as other bonds and notes issued by Montefiore, in particular the bonds that were issued by DASNY on behalf of Montefiore in 2018. The bonds are being issued, as we've said, to reimburse the medical center for costs of capital projects for the medical center and its affiliates. A substantial component of the bonds will be issued to finance improvements, a new office outpatient center for White Plains Hospital Medical Center, which is an affiliate of Montefiore, and that's actually the reason why the bonds are being issued under the DASNY Act rather than the MICVA Act, since White Plains Hospital is not the actual borrower of the bonds, but is operating some of the bond finance facilities.
The general resolution authorizes the authority to establish a debt reserve fund, for any of the series of the bonds issued, but it's not currently anticipated that a debt service reserve fund will be established for either of the series proposed today. It's proposed that the authority adopt the two series resolutions, which are identical in all respects, but for the series designation, which each authorize the issuance again of up to $420 million, the aggregate being $420 million. Each series resolution delegates to an authorized officer of DASNY the authority to make certain determinations with respect to such series, which are to be evidenced by one or more bond series certificates executed by such authorized officer, including, again, subject to the aggregate principal cap of $420 million, the maturity date or dates of the bonds, provided that no bonds will mature later than 30 years following February 1st of the succeeding issue date. Whether the bonds are going to be fixed rate or variable rate bonds, the interest rates on the bonds and the method for determining those interest rates, purchase price of the bonds, the redemption provisions for the sale, conversion, or exchange of the bonds. Excuse me. The authorized bonds are to be issued tax exempt bonds. the authorized bonds to be issued as tax exempt bonds and the authorized bonds to be issued as federally taxable bonds, if any. The projects to be funded by the proceeds, the bonds and other obligations to be refunded with the proceeds of the bonds, whether the bonds are to be secured by a debt service reserve fund, which I just discussed, whether to obtain credit enhancement for the bonds and the terms of such credit enhancement. And each series resolution also establishes the funds and accounts for such series and authorizes an authorized officer of DASNY to execute a loan agreement and bond purchase agreement with respect to the Series 2020 bonds.
I'd just like to finish up by just mentioning a few things about the master trust indenture and the obligations issued pursuant to the indenture. Each member of the obligated group, which in this case again is only Montefiore Medical Center at this point, will pledge and grant a security interest in its gross receivables to secure its obligations, to make required payments under the obligations issued under the MTI, and they may grant a lien or mortgage on properties which will be determined at the time of sale. The master indenture sets forth the principal operating covenants of the members of the obligated group. For example, each obligated group member will agree to maintain a debt service coverage ratio of not less than 1.1 to 1. They'll agree to limitations on the rights to issue additional debt, encumber their property, merge or consolidate with other entities, and dispose of their assets. In addition, each member of the obligated group will covenant to maintain cash on hand as of the end of each fiscal year of at least 45 days. Are there any questions?
Yes, John.
Could we revisit for a minute something you said, Neil? I want to make sure I understood it. The bonds can be redeemed and then resold by the issuer? Is that?
No, they wouldn't technically be redeemed, but on any date that the bonds are subject to optional redemption, the authority will also have the option to require the owners to call in to basically tender their bonds, at which point the bonds could be remarketed at a different interest rate mode or at an interest rate mode to maturity. It's a feature that we're seeing more and more as institutions are becoming concerned about the ramifications of potential federal income tax rule changes, which might not allow refundings in the future. So this is kind of a mechanism which we would hope could provide the same type of flexibility.
That's extremely important.
Yeah, it is
Yes,
important.
that's good. So if that was to take place, would this board have to act on that, or is that something the issuer can just do?
I don't think the board would need to act
I wouldn't
in
think so
accordance
either.
with the documents.
Yeah, because it's the same bonds.
Right.
We're just pulling them in and reselling them.
Can I just have a follow? I had a similar question. Did the authority makes that decision though? Did I hear you correctly?
Well, the authority at the request of the institution would make that decision. So obviously they would consult as staff thinks it's necessary and appropriate.
So that would just be a future update to board if that were to occur.
That's correct.
Okay.
Would there be a circumstance in which the borrower would like to see the bonds recalled? To have DASNY exercise its call on the bonds, or DASNY would not want to do that?
I can't foresee that. There may be financial reasons why, as time goes on, there may be reasons why DASNY might not be comfortable with a remarketing depending upon the credit conditions at the time and so forth. But I really don't see it at this point.
Yeah, I can't foresee that either, Neil.
Sorry, Fortune.
I said I can't foresee that either.
So you just got, I have to ask this last question. the bonds themselves, by their terms, allow the issuer to adjust the interest rate and make these changes to make them more attractive to the market. If we try to invoke this mechanism, or if the issuer invokes this mechanism, bonds by their terms can be adapted to the next offering.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
It doesn't really, essentially the bonds are subject to optional redemption roughly after 10 years. In most cases, that will be determined at the time of pricing. So instead of having the bonds redeemed, it would be possible for the authority to tell the bond owners that they need to tender their bonds. So the bonds remain outstanding, just not held by those particular owners anymore, and then they could be remarketed to others. So it's not a situation where the bond owners, it doesn't really change the rights of the bond owners, since they could always be called out through a redemption.
If you thought of this, bravo.
I can't take credit for ownership of this one.
Just kidding.
You can't hear, it's okay. Are there any other?
I had just
You
one.
adopted it.
Yeah,
So.
I had just one follow-up because it's intriguing to me as well. Is the option, is it a 10-year period, the optional redemption? Is it a 10-year?
Typically, it's a 10-year period, but generally, the redemption provisions are determined when the bonds are sold. There are times when you may see a shorter redemption provision, and there are times when the underwriters determine that certain bonds may not be subject to redemption. So we won't know that until we get into the market.
I just wanted two things. At yesterday's Finance Committee, Tracy was kind enough to do a very detailed explanation of Health's, I guess, informal okay with this transaction because it's being taken place under the DASNY Act, not the Mutual Act. So there was an extensive discussion yesterday at Finance before we recommended this from Health. The other quick question I had, and I should have asked it yesterday, but I thought about it today, is why isn't there a mortgage from White Plains Hospital on? Why is it just the medical center, when most of the money is being used for the hospital?
That, I think, is really more of a business point.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
But they just don't believe the security is needed, White Plains?
I think, as I said, it's a business point for the institutions to decide which properties it's going to mortgage. I mean, because they have borrowed, they're borrowing here, both for White Plains Hospital as well as Montefiore Medical Center proper. So it's, it's their determination as to which properties they want to mortgage.
And for clarity, Tracy, what you offered yesterday, I thought was a clear DOH approval without there being need to provide a writing, because this is not happening under the current statute.
Right. Yeah, and I'd be happy to share a couple of, highlights, not to go into the depth, because we did have an in-depth discussion yesterday. And thank you, Chairman. As stated, even though the department procedurally isn't providing a written recommendation, we certainly have a vested interest in Montefiore. And we'll just state that, as I stated yesterday, that Montefiore is a very essential safety net provider to not only to the Bronx community, but also to Southern Westchester, and expanding into the Hudson Valley market, and has a significant percentage of its individuals covered, both under the Medicaid program as well as Medicare, and so has a longstanding relationship with the New York State Department of Health. We wanted to take time, and we appreciated the time to get comfortable with the extent of the debt being issued, because we want to make sure that there isn't any future instance where Montefiore would be coming back saying we can't repay this debt. And so it was we took the time to understand that the tax exempt issue before us today was contemplated at the time of the 2018 financing. And so the rating of BBB that was obtained, which the department views as extremely favorable because it allowed Montefiore, that 2018 financing, to position itself to access the capital market in a much more efficient way. Previously, it had been doing this through HUD insured financing. So the obligated group structure and the attainment of a BBB rating was favorable, and it was confirmed by the Montefiore system that that rating was affirmed, and because this debt issuance was contemplated at the time of the 2018 financing. And secondly, we wanted to point out that this tax exempt issue also has a refunding component, and so I don't know if it was stated, but the refunding has net present value savings, so that's important for us to see. Next, we just wanted to understand better the concurrent taxable issuance, because it's unknown right now what the level of that is going to be. And so, as stated, the ratios today are very favorable with respect to liquidity and profitability has been upheld, but the leverage ratios, were something we wanted to understand with respect to the concurrent taxable issuance. So our understanding from Montefiore is that they are in negotiations and discussions right now with the rating agencies, and they are limiting that amount of taxable issuance so as not to jeopardize an investment grade rating. They see the taxable issuance, as was stated, as an ability to take advantage of the capital markets today with favorable interest rates, and they intend to put that capital in the short term on the balance sheet to maintain liquidity, but have available for future strategic capital. We confirmed that that is going to be for strategic capital and not for working capital purposes. You never want to borrow for working capital purposes, and they confirmed that to us, as well as we confirmed that they do not anticipate any future borrowing, after this 2020 issue.
It strikes me that this was a really well-conceived financing on a bunch of different levels.
Yeah. So we did get comfort, and we are certainly voicing our support for this.
Okay. Are there other questions? The resolution which would support the Series A and B transactions are not in your books, but I have now seen them. They've been prepared, and I think that the explanation, Michelle, that you provided of the Series A and B proposals covered the universe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But if there are questions, because you don't have the resolution, don't hesitate to ask. All right, there being none, may I have please a motion to approve the transaction? John Gardner, thank you very much. Tracy, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
The motion is approved, and it's approved unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We now have 4 resolutions to proceed. The first is behind tab 7, the Interagency Council Approved Loan Program, and Gerard Clauser begins this presentation. Gerard?
Good morning
Does he
again.
get paid more
He
money?
does not. No, he doesn't.
I've had a break for a few months, I guess. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, DASNY senior staff and guests, the staff report provided to members is seeking authorization for a resolution to proceed for the Interagency Council of Developmental Disabilities. This transaction will include tax-exempt and/or taxable fixed and variable rate bonds in one or more series at one or more times through a negotiated sale and/or a private placement. The purpose of the financing is to refinance existing bank loans and reimburse certain institutions for cash expenditures which are used to renovate or acquire certain properties used to provide services for the developmentally disabled. Just a note on your transaction summary. The report identified a DOH Medicaid project. However, the YAA participant includes 8 OPWDD PPA approved projects in the amount of $8.6 million. On a program level, this will be the 14th financing for the Interagency Council. This is a pooled financing with 5 participants. with a term not to exceed 26 years and an amount not to exceed $22 million. Each borrower will have their own loan agreement. Security features include a pledge of all public funds attributable to each financed project, a standby intercept of these public funds attributable to each project, a debt service reserve fund of 6 months, and mortgages on real property acceptable to DASNY where available. I've used the term PPA, that stands for prior property approval. And so I'll just give you a little bit of color about the prior property approvals. To initiate a project, it's required to have a prior property approval to initiate a project to serve individuals with developmental disabilities. The not-for-profit provider is required to complete a CON, Certificate of Need, which is reviewed by OPWDD for compliance and need. Ultimately, the projects are supported through contract and reimbursement arrangements with OPWDD. The staff commits to support the development and operation of the project. The state commits to support the development and operation of the project if it is completed and in conformance with the PPA. Project funding is subject to annual appropriation of sufficient monies by the state legislature, and the prior property approvals are in place for all 17 of the proposed projects. I think in tab 2, you may notice there is a small component of non-PPA approved projects, which are relatively immaterial. The projects are expected to have a replacement operator component, and we anticipate a rating of AA2 from Moody's. The state's programs and policies demonstrate the essentiality of community-based services to the developmentally disabled population in the state of New York, and the 5 borrowers in this pool have had experience in providing needed service to this population. Accordingly, the staff report recommends that the board adopt a resolution to proceed for one or more series of bonds with maturities not to exceed 26 years in the aggregate amount not to exceed $22 million. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Gerard. Are there questions? Hearing none, may I have a motion please to approve it? Thank you, Gerard. Second? Darrell, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. 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 The motion carries.
Chairman, our next transaction is Columbia University, and David Ostrander will present this transaction for us. You can find it behind tab 8. Good morning.
David, how are you?
The board is being asked to adopt a resolution to proceed for one or more series of tax-exempt and/or taxable fixed and/or variable rate bonds with terms not to exceed 40 years in an amount not to exceed $150 million on behalf of Columbia University. This will be a new money issuance to finance numerous projects located throughout the Columbia University system. A major portion of the project includes the work associated with ongoing construction at Columbia's new business school, which will be located on the Manhattanville campus. The business school's new home will span approximately 492,000 square feet across 2 buildings, incorporating flexible classroom space with the latest technology, dedicated spaces for recruiting, events, and networking, and an alumni welcome center. The business school project will include the creation of a 40,000 square foot public square to be located between the 2 new buildings. Construction is ongoing and is expected to be completed in 2021. The remaining projects to be financed through this issuance include various renovations at the Morningside Heights as well as the Medical Center campuses. The financing structure, the plan is to issue tax-exempt fixed-rate bonds. And as far as security, the university is currently rated AAA by both Moody's and S&P, both with a stable outlook. And accordingly, Columbia qualifies for an unsecured borrowing under DASNY's financing guidelines for independent institutions. Some additional information on Columbia. The university continues to experience positive demand and enrollment trends and remains among the most selective universities in the country. Of the 40,203 applicants for fall of 2018, just 2,260 were accepted, indicating an acceptance rate of just 5.6%. Columbia has consistently reported positive operating margins, averaging 5.1% annually over the past 5 years. The university's overall revenue mix is diverse. For fiscal year 2019, 24% of the university's total operating revenues came from net tuition and fees. And lastly, total net assets have increased by 17.2% over the last 5 years, reaching $16 billion at fiscal year end 2019. Mr. Chairman.
David, thank you. Are there questions for David? Hearing none, might I have a motion to Approved. Thank you, Bill. Joan, thank you, Joan. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Motion carried unanimously. David, thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Our next transaction is behind tab 9. It's NYSARC Inc. Steve Coolidge will present this transaction.
Welcome back, Steve.
The board is being asked to adopt a resolution to proceed for 25-year fixed rate tax exempt and/or taxable bond issue in an amount not to exceed $40 million on behalf of NYSARC Inc. NYSARC is a leading advocate and service provider for the developmentally disabled. Chartered in 1949, NYSARC is a not-for-profit corporation that through its 51 chapters currently serves over 60,000 people. The programs and services provided by NYSARC are state mandated and supported, and our experience with NYSARC goes back to 1988. NYSARC has always paid its debt service on time and in full. As of September 30th, NYSARC had approximately $78 million in DASNY bonds outstanding. The projects included in this financing are expected to be approximately 15 new money projects, including individualized residential alternatives and day rehabilitation facilities for approximately 6 participating chapters. Refinancing of taxable indebtedness for approximately 27 projects for approximately 7 participating chapters, and the refunding of NYSARC's DASNY Series 2010 bonds. Net present value savings for the refunding are estimated at approximately $1.8 million or 11.4% of the bonds being refunded. The bonds are expected to be rated AA2 by Moody's. Security is expected to include a pledge and assignment of certain public funds allocable to the participating NYSARC chapters, the statutory authority to intercept this aid in the event NYSARC defaults in the payment of debt service under the loan agreement or fails to replenish the debt service reserve fund after a withdrawal, mortgages on certain real property, and the debt service reserve fund. Mr. Chairman.
Steve, thank you. Are there questions? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? John Johnson, thank you. Tracy, thank you. Second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. 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 Motion carries unanimously. Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our last but not least, but also includes Steve, is our St. Joseph's College transaction behind tab 10. Steve?
Thank you. The board is being asked to adopt a resolution to proceed for fixed and/or available rate tax exempt and/or taxable bonds to be issued through either a negotiated sale or private placement with a not to exceed amount of $32 million on behalf of St. Joseph's College. The current expectation is the 2020 bonds will be a fixed rate negotiated sale. The college has 2 non-residential campuses. The Brooklyn campus is in the Clinton Hill neighborhood and includes 7 buildings across 3 blocks. The Long Island campus is set on 32 acres in Patchogue. The college offers more than 50 undergraduate majors, pre-professional and certificate programs with graduate degrees in management, business, healthcare management, human services, nursing, accounting, and education. The college has limited debt obligations with a single series of DASNY bonds, its only debt outstanding. In 2010, DASNY issued $27.8 million on behalf of the college, and there's currently approximately $21.2 million of bonds outstanding. The college plans to refund these bonds with no principal deferral and no extension of the final maturity. The refunding is estimated to result in net present value savings of approximately $3.8 million, which equates to 18% of the bonds being refunded. Gross annual debt service savings is approximately $465,000 a year. The college also plans to issue new money bonds to finance a portion of costs of constructing a new 38,000 square foot student center on its Long Island campus. The student center will provide more appropriate instruction space, serve as a gathering place for students between classes, and offer opportunities for auxiliary income. The student center is expected to help maintain and increase enrollment and be a focal point for student and community activities on the campus. The total project is expected to cost approximately $13 million, with approximately $8.6 million being financed through the proposed bond issue, and the balance coming from gifts, fundraising, and cash reserves. The new money bonds are expected to be amortized over 30 years. Gross annual debt service on the new money is expected to be approximately $465,000, which is also the estimated gross annual savings on the refunding. That's really how the school's management and board is looking at the transaction overall. Therefore, total annual debt service following the proposed financing will be roughly the same as it is today, which is approximately $2 million per year until 2035, and would then drop to approximately $465,000 from 2036 through 2050. The bonds are expected to have a Fitch rating in the BBB category. Security is expected to include a mortgage, pledge of revenues, and financial covenants. Regarding the credit, the college is highly vulnerable to enrollment fluctuations, with approximately 89% of total operating revenues coming from net tuition and fees. The college's annual net tuition and fees per student are among the lowest of all private colleges on Long Island and in the tri-state area. Despite this, the college's FT enrollment declined from approximately 5,000 students in the fall of 2010 to approximately 4,100 students in the fall of 2015. The college's decrease in enrollment was reflected in its operating results. The college reported negative operating margins each year from 2011 to 2016. This led to the college failing to meet its debt service coverage covenant requirement from 2011 to 2016, and its unrestricted resources to debt ratio covenant from 2015 to 2017. The failure to meet the required covenant levels are not considered a default under the loan agreement. However, in 2016, DASNY exercised its right to require the college to engage a management consultant, and the college complied. The college stabilized enrollment over the past 5 years by adding certain graduate courses and providing flexibility with online and weekend programs and providing additional financial support. FT enrollment increased from 4,105 students in the fall of 2015 to 4,529 students in the fall of 2019. With the improved enrollment, St. Joseph's has reported positive operating margins in each of the past 3 years and has been in compliance with all financial covenants the past 2 years. Debt service coverage has improved from 0.1 to 1 in 2015 to 5.3 to 1 in 2019. Over the past 5 years, net tuition per student has increased from approximately $15,800 to approximately $18,100. Total net assets have increased from approximately $65 million in 2016 to approximately $91 million in 2019. So to summarize, the college is highly tuition dependent. Enrollment dropped from 2010 to 2015 and has since increased and stabilized at a level that has produced positive operating results. The proposed issuance will refund the Series 2010 bonds with estimated annual gross savings, which will offset the annual debt service associated with the new money project. Therefore, staff is requesting the board to adopt a resolution to proceed for bonds with an amount not to exceed $32 million on behalf of St. Joseph's College. Mr. Chairman.
Steve, thank you. Are there questions for Steve? Hearing none, might I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Thank you, John. Is there a second? Is there a second? Thank you, John. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Is there none opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Steve, are you coming back? I will propose now that we go into an executive session. May I have a motion, please, to go into executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of a particular corporation, proposed pending or current litigation, and the employment history of particular persons or matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of particular officials. Thank you, John. Is there a second, please? Thank you, John Gardner. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion is approved unanimously. We are in executive session. Please have the record reflect that we've just returned to the public session from executive session, during which no decisions were made other than to return to the public session. I'll ask the audit committee chair to give a brief audit committee report because it appears behind 11.
For no other reason. Actually, the reason is, the reason for the report is that the audit committee met yesterday. It was not one of our shorter meetings, but this will be a brief report. We received an update on the internal audit. Representatives from KPMG were at our meeting. They gave us their regular briefing on the annual audit, which was, of course, interesting. And KPMG also sent their local managing partner to the meeting. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chairman Gardner. Are there questions for John about the audit committee meeting? There being none, the next agenda item is the president's report.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. By time tab 12, you have my president's report, and today we'll have actually 2 resolutions that come out of our president's report, so we'll pick those 2 items up first. The initial one is around the project labor agreement, and most of you have been around for a long time, so you understand this. I won't go into too much detail, but the bottom line is in the 1940s or so, there was a Wicks law passed in the state of New York saying you had to use 4 different types of bidding processes for any construction project over $3 million. That became cumbersome, and so as an alternative, we had the option of using a project labor agreement on individual projects. Now in New York, they've consolidated into a memorandum of understanding and a template for the project labor agreement. We've been utilizing this for the last 7 years or so on 3-year increments, and so this has come up for review and renewal. So a lot of time and energy went into looking at the old agreement, what we'd like to have in a new agreement, kind of what we would make our lives easier and better. Stephen's team did an excellent job of negotiating that. I want to highlight the work that Aaron Butler, Michael Clay, Fran Brooks, Brendan Wolf, and Steve himself did on this. One of the comments that was made to me was we were so prepared going into with our rationale that we got everything we wanted to in the agreement, and it was really well documented as to why we wanted these issues. We preserved our MWBE issues that were important to us. We had one specific request from CUNY that was included in this new agreement, and we've raised some of the requirements. As an example, under the Wicks law, $3 million is the threshold that invokes this. Prior, we had $1 million, now $3 million threshold as well. Once you have exceptions, initially we had $20 million in aggregate exceptions that we had to go to project labor agreement. That's to move to $40 million. So these all made this a better agreement than it was before. And as Steve has said before, he's not sure we'll ask for next time, but I'm sure in 3 years we'll come up with something. But I do want to congratulate your team, Steve, on this, and your job well done. So we have in your book the memorandum as well as the template for the agreement. And again, with each project, there'll be specific agreement for those projects. And Mr. Chairman, we need a resolution by the board to approve it on our side. The BCTC is in the process of getting their approvals in place with their 30 to 40 members, and we should have that in the next 30 to 40 days.
The resolution is immediately, I'm sorry, the memorandum is immediately behind the material related to the governor's proposals for today's state of the state. And behind that memorandum is the resolution itself. You've had a chance to take a look at it. Are there any questions about the resolution? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve it? Thank you very much, Jerry. Gentlemen, thank you very much for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Is there none opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our second resolution today is around our retirees. This is always a good time to honor those who've been working for DASNY for a long time. They contributed to the success we feel today. We've had 24 retirees in 2019. So we have a resolution of appreciation for those retirees. They asked the board to approve each of the retirees to get a copy of the resolution. And then we also have 2 breakfasts being held, one on February 11th in New York City and one on February the 12th, Wednesday, here in Albany. We will all receive invitations of those. I laughed to myself, Mr. Chairman, that the start time is 9:30, so clearly it's a retirement breakfast. It's for working person. But I certainly invite all of you to join us. It's always a good time. So with that, we have a resolution just honoring our employees that are working well done.
Before I call for a vote, I've said for several years now that I commend DASNY, and it's fabulous that DASNY takes the time, makes the effort to both create a resolution and to honor these retirees in a breakfast ceremony. I've attended that ceremony on a number of occasions. It is well worth your time if you happen to be here in New York City. Stop by and shake their hands. Let them know that we care about the work that they have done. They created DASNY's present and they provided the best in the future. And I think we need to hear that. So if you have time to do it, please get by. And I'll ask the staff to provide all of you with the dates of the breakfasts if you can do that. Having nothing else to say about that, may I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution? Thank you, Joe. Wellington, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. The motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board, we appreciate that. In my last president's report, I made a comment about one goal of mine was to make DASNY the absolute best place to work in the state of New York. And so we've already begun some progress toward that. I tasked Deborah Frazier with leading that effort for us so that we can begin to organize, one, what are the best practices both private and public institutions have around a great workspace and great work environment. Secondly, doing some internal both sampling as well as surveying of employees about what they like, what they don't like, things that they feel good about, things they don't feel good about, so we can get some of that input, meeting with managing directors, and then of course engaging our human capital team and Mike's team, the legal team, to make sure we can make some changes that will get us to where we want to get to. And then of course we also want to be able to measure this, and so she'll be working on kind of what are the best ways to measure whether you've achieved this or not. And to me, it's not just a nice thing to do. It's always good to have an environment where people want to come to work. But it serves two purposes for us at DASNY. One is, employees who feel good about coming to work and giving their best, give the institution their best effort. And you've seen in other corporations where that is the case. Second is a practical matter. We have an aging workforce. We've all identified that. And so succession planning is important to us. And so our ability to recruit talent is going to be a really large issue. We've seen it already in some of the postings we've had. And so we really want to make the environment here something that makes people want to come to DASNY as a place to work. Just a couple of highlights on some things we've already done around that. They're small items, but I think important. As you know, we're moving the New York office down to 28 Liberty. Janine Taft, who's kind of leading our design program, has included some elements in the design that are more millennial elements around common workspaces, good places that have technology and meeting environments, some more casual places to work and meet, ways to get as much light into the interior as possible. And so I really appreciated her work there. We've done some small tweaks in some of our policies. As an example, we took a half day on Christmas Eve, and it was kind of an odd thing in our policy, and that was if one took vacation already, they had to take a full day of accrual of vacation. And so we made it a half day of accrual so they could get their half day. And so there's just some minor things we're doing along the way as we take this project on. But you'll be hearing more about this as we go. This is an important initiative for us. Next item is similar to that, make this the best place to work, the best place to be a board member. We're going to evaluate our board prep process. As you can imagine, having monthly board meetings, there's a lot of stress on the staff internally to prepare the information and make sure we're legally in the right place and that you have the information in a timely and effective manner. So we're evaluating all those internal processes to make those easier for us. We also are looking to deliver to you as best product we can so that you can get to the information as easily and efficiently as possible. You should be saying goodbye to your books. Over time, we're going to be moving to a more electronic, friendly version of this. Mr. Chairman said he's going to start shorting staples, since we'll be less staples going forward. But this is important to us, right, to make sure that we are best in class, but also that when you get the information electronically, you can easily get through it so that you come to the board being prepared without spending an inordinate amount of time doing that. And so along those lines, Deb and her group will also be reaching out to a sampling of you to ask what's working for you, what's not working for you, what can we do better. And so your input will be valued But our hope is that by the February board meeting, we'll have a more efficient process, and you'll start to see some improvements in our.
You're not gonna not send us a book though in February.
We'll send you a book in February, and we'll slowly transition you. Won't eliminate paper, 100%. But we'll certainly try to reduce the amount of paper that you get, and then also make it a little more efficient. So working hard on that. Someone has mentioned today's the state of the state. I will be down there, and some others will as well. Governor Cuomo has 30 some odd proposals he has on the table. One specifically affects DASNY, and that is making permanent the Buy America around the steel for projects that are above $1 million. And so we'll be monitoring that along with the Thruway Authority and other partners to make sure we comply with what he's trying to accomplish there. Logistically, I will be leaving this building at 12:30. If any of you want to ride over, meet me downstairs, and we will provide transportation to you to the state and report back on that.
And the Buy American steel, is it still just for horizontal steel?
Yes. And then finally, I want to announce that most of you may not know this, but Portia has a rotator cuff injury that does not allow her to pat herself on the back very well. and so my job is to do that. We priced a $3.4-ish billion pit transaction in December. We talked about that at our last meeting. It went extremely well. It's probably in the top 5 size transactions. That always presents its own set of challenges in any environment. We were pricing kind of the week before the market closed for the holiday season. That presented some issues. We had some instability and volatility in the market around China in particular at the time. So on the Friday before pricing, and I listened to all the calls. I didn't participate in any of them. I listened to them all. There was kind of a tension in the call around how will this deal go? How will it be received? What do we need to do to get to market? Over the 3-day period of pricing, our team, Portia, Matt, and the whole crew did a great job of working with financial advisors, underwriters, legal counsel to get in the marketplace, work hard on structure, being flexible. Sometimes you go to market very aggressive pricing and hope to get as low price as possible from the beginning. Other times when the market feels a little soft, you might go a little cheaper and bring the pricing back in. There are different couponing structures that people have, and on a smaller transaction, we might dictate what that coupon structure is. In a larger transaction, we let the market tell us what couponing structure they wanted. Long of the short is we priced it successfully. Our underwriter took down about $250 million in bonds, which is a lot, and so we appreciate their support of the issue. From top to bottom, we had good demand of both the taxable and tax exempt. They got excellent participation from the market in that. I'm always reticent to call out an individual, but Matt Bergen did a really nice job of straddling between the pricing and DOB to make sure that with this complex transaction on one side, that he was very communicative with the DOB and was able to really help get that done quickly and efficiently. And so, Portia, I just want to congratulate you and your team on that great transaction. And we'll work on a rotator cuff, but someone needs to pat your team back on this great transaction, so we appreciate that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, my report is complete.
Thanks very much, Mr. President. Then we're going to go to agenda item 13, the Office of Public Finance and Portfolio Monitoring.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Behind tab 13 are the standard public finance reports. As Ruben had mentioned, since the last board meeting, we closed a $3.4 billion PIT transaction. It was about $2 billion in tax-exempt bonds and $1.4 billion in taxable. Ruben did a great job of really giving you color in terms of that financing and the pricing in particular. But so, I echo his comments, and in particular echo the work that Matt Bergen did on this financing in terms of really working with the Fuller's office as well in terms of getting their approvals. Just in terms of just a brief recap on what our volume looked like for the calendar year, we issued $5.5 billion in bonds and 19 financings. That does not include the $3.4 billion PIT financing because that closed on January 3rd. From a fiscal year perspective, we issued 4.6 billion fiscal year to date and 17 financings. As you know, we track our financings on a fiscal year basis. That's the basis upon which we provide the annual bond sale report, and you'll see all that later in the year. Brief market update, total new issue supply for 2019 ended up around 421 billion, almost 22% higher than total supply seen in 2018. Taxable municipal supply was about 70.5 billion last year, up by about 115% from the previous year. Just very interesting in terms of the change in the market last year. And, we'll see, it seems as though taxable issuance is sort of here to stay. But, particularly as rates are very, very low. But, we'll continue to monitor that, and you'll see that in the financings as we move forward. Total supply for this week is expected to be about 8.1 billion. U.S. government bonds are modestly weaker, with a 10-year Treasury increased by 1 basis point and the 30-year Treasury increased by 2. Top-rated municipal bonds improved across most of the curve, with a 10-year and 30-year MMD both decreasing by 2 basis points. Municipal bond funds continue to report inflows. So we saw another week of inflows for the week of January 2nd. That now makes 52 consecutive weeks of inflows, which is, again, pretty remarkable for the market. 110 and 30-year MMD have decreased since the last board meeting by 8, 11, and 8 basis points respectively. Again, rates have just been really very, very low. We continue our efforts to streamline and make our processes more efficient. We'll keep you posted as we meet with our clients and financing partners. I'd also like to note that included in your packet are bond sale summary reports, which include performance metrics. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Portia. Questions for Portia? If there are none, then Steve, we have the construction progress report.
Thank you. Behind tab 14 are the 3 standard construction division reports. On the cover of the construction projects report are photos of the Whitman Grants project. The scope of the project was the demolition of existing reinforced concrete ramps around the Whitman building, installation of waterproofing, radiant heat, masonry restoration, drainage and landscaping, as well as new air handling units in the basement of the building, new building controls, and basement renovations. Added scope to the project included above basement ceiling work, additional abatement in areas above the ceilings, and the addition of the black box theater renovation, as well as some plaza work adjacent to the building. The design consultant was Urban. Design started in August of 16 and completed in June of 17. TDX Construction Corp was our CM. The general contractor was C&L Contracting. Construction started in October of 2017 and completed in May of 2019. You should note there were a number of existing conditions discovered during construction, which posed multiple challenges to the construction team and led to the addition of scopes of work to the project. Behind page 3, there are 6 new projects added to DASNY's portfolio. The Mid-Hudson Forensic Hospital project was added back in, and I'll talk about that in a second. It's also listed under dropped projects. I'll explain that in a minute. The New York State Veterans Home at St. Albans, a kitchen project for about $10 million. 2 Gozer projects. The DOH Life Sciences Lab project is listed this month as added into our portfolio. And the DeFriedenberg Hall bathrooms up at SUNY Plattsburgh as well. If you don't include the lab, there's about $54 million worth of new projects. If you do, it's over 800. Under the drop projects, again, is the Mid-Hudson Forensic Hospital project. We created this project initially to take a look at kind of the project's feasibility. So under the original project number, we did a feasibility study. We completed that study, closed that project, opened a new project for design and site survey, which is the project listed under the new projects added. On page 11, the schedule of construction expenditures year-to-date through November of 2018. Last year was $481 million. Year-to-date through November of 2019 was $485 million. So essentially, pretty much the same year over year. Just quickly going through programs and projects from an update standpoint. I'll start with NYCHA. As previously reported, the security portfolio has been completed. That consisted of 78 projects at approximately $47 million. On the appliance purchase and installation side, we're nearing completion. There's only 2 developments left out of 40. We anticipate those 2 developments will be completed in February of this year. And on the quality of life side, we have all projects now out of design. There's 10 projects in procurement, 16 projects in construction, and 21 projects substantially complete. So we're really getting close to completing this portfolio. On the GOZER side, the Governor's Office for Storm Recovery Program, that continues to move forward. We have now 10 projects in design, 21 projects in procurement, 7 projects in construction, and 3 projects substantially complete. We're pushing toward the September 2022 program completion date. OPWDD, the Community Minor Maintenance Program. We learned in late 2019 of OPWDD's plans for DASNY services for their Community Minor Maintenance Program. They've tasked DASNY with design and construction for 85 projects with a value slightly over $10 million for the 2021 program. We've begun project management strategies by naming our DASNY PM staff assigned, scheduling site visits with OPWDD at the different DVSOs and project sites, and naming design consultants who will support the program. On Javits and Moynihan, work continues at both projects, where DASNY is providing permitting services. I was able to visit the Moynihan Station project last week. There's a very heavy workforce that is moved into the finishing stage of the project. Flooring is being installed in the train hall, as well as finished wall panels and glazing. The post office space is nearly complete for turnover to USPS for tenant fit-up. That should be commencing soon. The Long Island Railroad space is also moving toward tenant fit-up. Phase 2, the annex work, is moving toward really a pre-tenant fit-up construction phase. Overall, the project is advancing quickly. They're working toward a December 2020 completion date. I'll be visiting the Javits Center on Monday, which is also moving forward from a construction perspective. Our code administration department continues to support both projects with on-site oversight. South Beach, the project continues to move towards substantial completion. Finished work is progressing on the first floor. Punch listing has advanced on floors 2 through 5. Fire life safety pre-testing has commenced throughout the building. The project missed its substantial completion date of December 2019. We anticipate that substantial completion should land sometime in Q1 of 2020. Our next executive meeting for the project is tomorrow on site. At FIT, bid package 1, foundations, was advertised for bid in December. The bid opening date for that package is March 12th. Package 2, which is the balance of the project, will be advertised for bid on January 29th with a bid opening date of March 27th. The second package, construction documents are in-house and are undergoing design review today by DASNY's architects and engineers. And lastly, the Mid-Hudson Forensic Hospital project, we have 5 architect proposals that are under review. We plan to interview some number of those 5 entities in late January or early February. Site surveys are currently underway as well. We anticipate A design professional will be selected in the February-March timeframe, and design will begin thereafter. We are also in the procurement stage for CM services for that project. Just two other notes from construction. Gail Katzman, who was our director of project controls, resigned in December. That group includes our estimating, scheduling, and cost control functions and support all of our DASNY projects. For the short term, I have the department's managers reporting directly to me. I've begun to review the department, and we'll move forward with a plan once I figure that out. And PM Web, we're underway with our implementation to replace our contract manager system. We're working with our vendor on the implementation and a schedule for the implementation. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Steve. Questions for Steve? If there are none, I'll ask you, please.
I'll rest on the materials we discussed yesterday and today. Nothing to report.
I'll remind you all that the schedule for this year's meetings, committee meetings, and board meetings, schedule is may choose to snatch it out of the schedule. And last but never least, behind tab 16 is the report of the financial officer.
Thank you. On my financial report, are there any questions? I had nothing to add to that report. And then I'll move on to the budget package that you received. The package that you received reflects operating expenditures for the next fiscal year of approximately $116 million. It's a 1.7% increase over where we expect to end the current fiscal year. I'd just like to remind you that, as we've done in the past, because of the timing of our board meeting versus the state budget issuance, we have prepared our budget without insight into the state's budget. We assume a continuation of historical levels of support. Once we receive the state's budget, we will review that and certainly apprise you of any changes that we would make to the budget either in February or March. As noted in my memo and also as shown on page 3 of the presentation, the primary drivers of the increase in the operating expenditures really relate to salaries and benefits. The salaries are up approximately $1.6 million. That reflects cost of living and step and longevity increases. The FTE level is at 515. That's consistent with the average for the current fiscal year and is 14 FTEs below what the adopted budget was for the current fiscal year. Benefits are increasing just under $1 million. The increase reflects approximately a 3% increase in health insurance premiums due to higher rates of participation and higher Social Security taxes and contributions for retirement and associated with changes in both the rates and the levels of salaries that we have. Page 6 of the presentation provides additional details from the summary page and what I've just reviewed. Before we move on to the impacts that the proposed budget has on our financial position, just wanted to review again a couple of the major assumptions. We just talked about the FTEs. We are staying consistent with the current year, and that is a lower level than budgeted for the current year. Our lines of business, financing fees. There are details on page 7 of the presentation. We are reflecting one additional private financing closing in addition to the current year projection, and both are really consistent with what our adopted budget was for this year. We have seen a larger number of deals closed. We do have a budget set at 17 for the upcoming year proposal. On page 9, we have our projected construction expenditures. And for 19-20, that reflects a 7% increase over the prior year and continuing to maintain a steady number of projects, approximately 1,000 or more. When you look at those assumptions and bring the revenues in with the proposed operating budget, we have on page 4 and 5, you can see the bottom line is where the financial results, pretty much in line with where we're expecting to end the current fiscal year with a slight surplus, just over $1 million. If there are questions on any of those components, I would be happy to answer those. Reminder, we will come back to the board in March for a request for approval. Any questions that you have between now and then, we would be happy to address. And again, any updates that we have for you, we will bring to you in the next 2 meetings.
Kim, might we plan a brief session at the February meeting to give members an opportunity to raise questions? The entire board. Thank you.
I have just 2 comments on her presentation on the budget. One is on January 21st, the governor is posing to get his budget final and presented. So that's kind of what we're hoping for. And the second is last night in Mr. Gardner's audit committee meeting, we had a robust conversation about cybersecurity. And so we'll be working with Kim and her group to make sure from a budget perspective that Paul and I will make sure that we need to increase our budget either on one-time expenditures or additional staff internally, longer term. I'll have a report on that in my president's report in February about our cybersecurity and how that might impact our budget.
If there are no further questions, Kim, thank you very much. Is there any other business to come before the board? Hearing none, I have a motion, please, to adjourn the meeting. Joan, thank you very much. John Johnson, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Please stand adjourned.